Okay, so I'm going to dive right in. So thank you for joining our webinar to learn about how to conquer Europe with software resellers. My name is Liz. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for MediaDev. As you probably already know, MediaDev is a marketing firm specialized in outreach programs for independent software vendors. We help companies promote their brands, recruit partners, both reseller partners and OEM ones. And we work to increase visibility for software products and services, both on and offline. So today we're going to cover the following points on this agenda. We're going to start off with why you should consider choosing resellers as part of your development strategy, how you can go about determining the best kind of reseller for your solution, how you can optimize your product so that resellers actually want to resell it. We'll also cover some points to keep in mind when you go about creating a reseller program and how you can entice resellers to get on board with your offer. While you may have questions during the presentation, it's preferable that you wait until the end. We will have a question and answer segment. We'll save about the last 5 minutes for that at the end. And of course, if our time runs over, I'd be happy to speak with any of you one-on-one should you have additional queries. There is a chat box. I think you can see that on the lower right-hand side of your screen. So that's what we'll use later on for the Q&A. Okay, so let's dive right in. Not everyone decides to go the route of recruiting resellers as part of a business development strategy. Of course, there are advantages and inconveniences to doing so, and it's really important to weigh the pros and the cons before you launch your reseller activity. The advantages of using resellers is that you can tap into resources that you might not have in-house. As we all know, each market in Europe is really different one from another. You might not be able to know all the ins and outs of those markets yourself. There are cultural differences, language differences, perception differences, and all of this really needs to be taken into consideration when you enter into a new market. So using a reseller means that you can tap into their existing network, you can gain insight from their experience, and it really should help you decrease your risk of failure. Obviously, if you have the right resellers who are prepared to get your product out there, it can be really a highly effective way to go international. The other thing resellers can bring to the table is that added value that you might not be able to provide on your own in a new local market. We've worked with software vendors who need reseller partners to really help with the implementation or deployment locally. We even worked with a software vendor once that really needed installation partners because it was just something they couldn't do themselves. They didn't have the manpower to be able to do that. Sometimes resellers, they have an offer or a service of their own that can be bundled with yours, which can provide extra value to the end customer. And this is something really interesting to explore because it really becomes a win-win type of relationship for both you and them. So again, choosing the right kind of reseller is really key to the success of any reseller strategy. And that is going to bring me to my next slide. When you're evaluating the types of resellers that would be the best fit for your offer, first you need to determine how you can leverage your own resources internally. Maybe you have someone on your team who already has certain language skills, or maybe there's a market that is close to your own that you can target first because it will be easier for you to travel to if you need to have face-to-face meetings. But once you've chosen that target market to go after, then you need to start to really evaluate the resellers that are in that area. and which ones are going to have the most potential for you. Is it the small ones that, they may want to diversify their own offers to grow their businesses, or maybe it's the larger ones who have a big customer base already that you can tap into. But in order to answer that question, you need to have a customer-centric mindset in your approach. What's going to improve your offer for the end user? Sometimes a box mover is really all you need, but for most small independent software vendors, that's really not enough. You need partners that are going to provide add-on services to make your offer complete and thus more enticing for the customer in that local market. Creating buyer personas is really a good way to get to know your target audience because it forces you to put yourself in their shoes. For any marketing outreach, you need to be able to easily explain the what's in it for me, because that's all anyone really wants to know about anyway. So despite popular belief, resellers are not just jumping at the opportunity to sell another product. They really need to be convinced that they're going to benefit from that relationship and that they will get something for the work they're going to put into selling your product. Resellers really want to make sure that they're going to earn a significant margin, that your product is going to appeal to their customers or could help them to attract new ones, which will again help them grow their businesses. So while some people skip the step of creating buyer personas, we think it's the foundation upon which a good marketing strategy is based. You also want to make sure that the resellers you target they reflect your company values. They're going to represent your product, they're going to represent your brand when they resell it. So taking the time you need to choose well before you start recruiting resellers is going to help you save time and a lot of headache later. And here I'll actually give you a real life example, but from another lifetime ago. Many years ago, I worked for a certified organic fish farm here where I'm based in France, and they wanted to export their fish to the United States. I won't get into why because it's really too long of a story. But we met with some potential reseller partners in New York, and the difference between them was really flagrant. One was prepared to organize tastings with the city's top chefs to convince them to buy. And another was worried that the end-to-end traceability we were offering as part of the organic label was actually going to be a problem for him because he wanted to hide the harvest date so that he could sell the fish for longer than the sell-by date. Anyway, of course, we didn't work with that reseller because he didn't reflect the company's values. But anyway, I think you get my point. So it is really important to make sure that the resellers you choose are aligned with, your business objectives, your company values, and what you want them to stand for. Profiling resellers and assessing each one can help you determine how they position themselves, what their reputation is, what types of products they currently resell. Are those products similar to yours? Are they in competition with yours? Are they complementary to the solutions you provide? Profiling them also gives you the ability to understand more about their expertise. In any target market, you may or may not be able to select multiple resellers. Sometimes you can if they target different verticals, but you certainly don't want your resellers competing against one another for the same customers. So that's another consideration to take into account when you're going to start the recruitment process. Again, this initial research is fundamental. This organization stage is really fundamental so that you can protect your brand, make sure you have the best resellers as your partners, and not just anyone willing to take on another product. So as I mentioned earlier, every market is different. To make a case in point, I'll use an easy example, IKEA. So IKEA in Sweden, they sell yellow couches. But those same yellow couches, they don't sell in France because the French consider the color yellow to be a sign of low quality or cheaply made products. In France, those same couches are gray. Go figure. But anyway, the reason I give this example is that your product may also need to be adapted to fit the needs or the cultural belief system or the economic reality of the country you're looking to expand into. It might not be accepted as it is. Maybe there's also a big competition in that market. That's in direct competition with your solution. So let's dive into that a little bit deeper. First, more about the French. So the French are notorious for not speaking English. I can say this because I live in France. Of course, the French are not the only ones, but my point here is that local language versions of a particular solution may be an added value for certain markets, or it may be an absolute requirement. So for this, it's important to understand, like I said before, your competition in that foreign market, what other solutions exist that you'll be compared to by the end customer. How does your proposition, your value proposition hold up to theirs? What are the key things that make your solution different or better? So that's something, that needs to be evaluated as well before you get started. And of course, what about price? Price is not always the most important factor when choosing a product, but it does need to be taken into consideration. People are usually willing to pay a bit more for a superior product. And in my experience, they're absolutely willing to pay more for a better service, especially in the B2B space. We have a partner company that we work with that conducts win-loss interviews, which is really interesting. They've done a lot of research about, what pushes people to go through with the purchase and why do sometimes they, not go through with the purchase. And one of the big factors that came out of that is that price really isn't as important as many people think it is, but the service really is a key factor when people make their decision. So of course, price has to be within reason, especially compared to competitors, but it's important to really understand what customers may or may not be willing to pay within those local markets. Sometimes you can evaluate that through a market survey, or you can beta test a new pricing model before you roll it out in a new territory. But again, it's something that needs to be considered. APIs or third-party integrations may also make your solution more attractive in certain instances. You may have a very popular third-party solution that's used in all businesses, in your target market, and it could make sense to have some kind of integration so that you get an edge. It's important to understand whether or not there are existing solutions that could warrant creating such an API. So this is another element to add to your research list. So the bottom line is that market research is a must in order to make sure your offer will be attractive to your audience abroad. You need to try to go at it with a neutral outcome in mind, because you may do the research only to find that it's not worth taking the risk, and that's okay. It's better to know that before you use a lot of your resources, and then you wind up diving into a really shallow lake. If your research shows that the potential is there, then you'll be much more serene to plan out the next steps. So what is the next step? Well, recruiting resellers to join you is the next step. So it may sound fancy to create a reseller program, but it's an important way to show your potential partners that you've done your homework and that you're really able to demonstrate to them the what's in it for me that I mentioned earlier. Having a reseller program is a way to package everything together. And it really needs to be an integral part of your marketing strategy. As a supporting document for your reseller program, you can create what we call a workhorse brochure. It's a kind of folder that you put one-page inserts inside of. Each one-pager can cover an area that you want to highlight. And that way, if you need to update the brochure over time, you don't need to redo the whole thing, but you just replace one of the one-page inserts as needed. This is especially practical if you plan to print out brochures to give people as takeaways, maybe after a meeting or a trade show. You can also use it for many different purposes, like a press kit down the road. So in this package, you'll really need to define how the partnership is going to work, what your expectation is of the reseller, and what they're going to get in return. Are you going to help them find leads or provide other marketing support? Will you work with them to create content or host events? What kind of margin can the reseller expect? What's the average deal size that they could imagine selling? What does your sales cycle look like? All of these questions are ones that, any reseller is going to ask that, so you need to be prepared to answer them within your marketing materials, and that could make for good inserts in this type of workhorse brochure. Of course, you're also going to need to outline terms and conditions, make sure that you're completely transparent about the give and take that you're expecting out of the relationship. This may seem difficult in the beginning, but once you get some resellers and that relationship is built, you'll be better able to determine, the best practices that you can amend, or those expectations can be, kind of changed over time. We've worked with some software vendors who get kind of freaked out by creating a reseller program because they're worried that everything has to be set in stone from the beginning, and then it can never change. But, our feeling is that you really should have a more agile mindset. It's okay to make some changes to a reseller program in time. I mean, obviously, you need to do your homework so that you know what you're doing. But you want to be open-minded so that you can learn from your experience as you grow. So that's just a little food for thought. Another important factor is how you plan to evaluate the success of the reseller relationship. Is it by the number of sales? Is it by the deal size? Maybe it's, the ability to sell to a new industry sector or a new kind of end user customer. Should sales be the only indicator of return on investment, or are there other ways that you can evaluate performance? Again, only you can determine that, but it's not something that needs absolutely to be set in stone. You can set objectives for the first year or the first half a year, and then you can revise accordingly. As I mentioned earlier, recruiting the first resellers to partner with you is not easy work, but it does get easier afterwards, so you shouldn't give up hope. In the beginning, you're really going to need to define your strategy so that you can find your buyer personas where they are and catch their attention with the right messaging. What we like to do is start by conducting a marketing audit where you're able to define your strategy to know, what do you have that needs to be revised, what new content do you need to create. Key messaging obviously needs to be worked on, and a lot of times people need to, update their website, do a website refresh, so that can happen. We think that it's most effective to use both inbound and outbound tactics in the recruitment effort. So having the right presence online, that'll help you increase the number of inbound inquiries that you get. It will also add legitimacy to your brand when you proactively use outbound to recruit new partners. So, that's something that needs to be looked at. On this slide, the funnel that's in front of you helps you visualize the tactics that can be used in each phase of the marketing process, so that you can turn general curiosity into concrete business deals. Of course, as with any sales funnel, building a pipeline takes education, it takes nurturing, it takes some time, but by engaging with prospects, you should be able eventually to convert them. So already at the conclusion. So first and foremost, as I said before, you have to do your homework. As I've said, you're going to need to do research to determine where you want to expand to and why, which resellers are going to be the right partners to help you with that expansion, and what you're going to offer those resellers so that they're really encouraged to join you in this adventure. You want to get them excited about it. So you need to determine how you're going to communicate the value that you bring, how you're going to target your reseller audience both on and offline so that you have inbound and outbound efforts in place that really encourage them to want to jump on board. And once you've done that, then you can begin to anticipate and scale for growth. So thanks again for joining. We're going to open it up now for questions. We've got about 7 minutes actually for questions, so that's a nice amount of time. I'll give you all some couple of minutes to type your questions in the chat box, which you should find, I think, on the lower right-hand side of your screen, and I will do my best to answer them. I'm sure somebody has a question. Okay, we do have a question here from Daniel. So one of our biggest local competitors is already using resellers in countries that we want to expand to as well. How do we approach these resellers? Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking this. I think this question really touches on 2 points that I mentioned earlier. So first, you really need to you need to showcase how the reseller can benefit from adding your product to their portfolio. Sometimes resellers like to give their end customers more than one choice of a solution. So it's not necessarily incompatible to go after the same resellers as your competitors. It really depends on the solution. Second, obviously you need to get your message out there to those resellers, and using various channels and nurturing that reseller is going to be necessary. You can't expect a reseller just to say yes the first time you ask them. So you need to be able to show them what's different about your product from your competitor. Why would it be a good idea for them to take on your solution too at the same time, and really educate the reseller on the benefits of including your product in their portfolio, like I just said. So some resellers do have a strict exclusivity policy. They're bound to working with only one provider for that particular type of software. But in my experience, most are really open to evaluating, a good offer. So I hope that answers your question. Does anyone else have some questions? Don't be shy. Okay, we have another question from Catherine. How does MediaDev recruit resellers? I think that's a good question because obviously when we're thinking about expanding into a new territory, it's a lot of work. And like I said before, sometimes people don't have all the resources internally to be able to, do all the research, create new content or marketing materials. Because we use a variety of channels to reach potential resellers for our clients, we can really help with developing the marketing strategy, conducting the marketing audit, creating the buyer personas, doing market surveys, and then once the execution phase kind of takes place, We can really, do the outbound recruitment, so the telemarketing, really contacting resellers to engage in high-level discussions with decision makers. We can animate communities online, or do, social selling. That's really a big hot topic nowadays, is using social media for social selling outreach. I actually do have some materials on that I can also share with you in the group of the people that have joined us here today. So, again, some of that education and nurturing takes a lot of time. It takes multiple conversations until the reseller is really ready to set up a meeting and negotiate a deal. So we can take care of a lot of that legwork. Okay. Yeah, thank you. So are there any other questions? I'll give people another minute or so to think about it. Okay, well, while people maybe are typing, I'd just like to say, thank you again for joining today. We're going to send you a link where you can download a copy of this PowerPoint presentation I just reviewed. We'll also make available on our website a recording of the webinar. And like I said, we've got a lot of resources on our website, which is www.mediadev.com. We have a whole resource library there specifically made for software vendors, including a template to create those buyer personas, to initiate some market research. We've got tons of articles, some vlogs as well that talk about, different tactics that you can use in the reseller recruitment process. And of course, you can write to me as well. My email is lemarchand@mediadev.com. And if you can't remember that, you can always just write one to contact@mediadev.com, which actually goes right into my inbox. So if there are no other questions, again, I'd like to thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. So take care. Thanks so much.